Hello, everyone. As the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto, I welcome you all to our Iranian cinema lecture series featuring Professor Tanya Shilina-Conte of the State University of New York, Buffalo, who will be speaking on the sartorial Islamic Baroque and folded feminisms in contemporary Iranian women's cinema. Professor Shilina-Conte, thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us virtually for today's lecture. I'm also grateful to our co-sponsors, the Canadian Society for Iranian and Persian Studies, the Iranian Studies Student Forum, the Encyclopedia Iranica Foundation, and the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute, which has generously funded the establishment of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. At the outset, I would like to express our individual and collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach in their ancestral homeland. My exceptional colleague, Dr. Sofia Farrokhی, will introduce Professor Shilina-Conte and moderate today's session. Dr. Farrokhí, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Tawakkoli, for the kind introduction. It's my great honor to introduce Professor Shilina-Conte. Professor Tanya Shilina-Conte is an assistant professor of global film studies in the Department of English at the University of Buffalo. She is the founder of Center for Global Media and curator of the Global Film Series, which highlights cinemas from regions including Iran, Cuba, Mexico, China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Professor Conte's research spans film theory, film philosophy, theories of affect, Deleuze and Guattari studies, feminist theory, global cinema, and Middle Eastern cinema, with a particular focus on Iranian and Palestinian cinema. Her first book, Black Screen, White Frames, Deleuze and Filmmaking Machines, was published by Oxford University Press in 2024. She is currently working on her second book, Anonymous Cinema in the Global Age, which explores themes of the anonymity in filmmaking, including Iranian and Syrian anonymous filmmakers, as well as anonymous mobile cinema during the Arab Spring Revolution. Her article and book chapters have appeared in prestigious journals and collections, including Screen, Film Philosophy, French Cinema Journal, Word and Image, and Identity and Diaspora in Films, and several other esteemed publications. Professor Conte, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for this generous introduction. I first would like to thank Professor Mohammad Tawakkoli for his kind invitation to participate in this enticing and enriching series. I also would like to express my gratitude to Sophia for her help with talk arrangements, as well as to Bilal, whose name I've seen here, I think, and also Mahtab for their work on the poster. And thank you also to those who came to the talk today. It's really wonderful to see so many people at the end of the semester. I know this is a busy time for everyone. And also hello to the virtual audience, synchronous and asynchronous. I'm very excited to share my insights and findings with all of you today. And before I share my PowerPoint, I just want to check whether my voice is coming through okay.
Very clear.
Wonderful. All righty. So with that, let's start. Just a moment. I just need to change my slide. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
An anonymous film. This anonymity is not just a moral posture. It is also a rule of the game that is very much a reality. A big thank you to all who participated anonymously in this film. It is not possible to reveal their names, not yet. In lieu of final credits, Remote Control, a film by the Iranian woman director Anonyma, from French anonyme or anonymous, ends with a black screen confronting us with this perplexing statement. Anonymous authorship may invite inquiry or arouse curiosity, but given the inflammatory subject of the political situation in this filmmaker's work, it sometimes becomes necessary for mere survival. In my experience as a female academic, artist, and immigrant, I have chosen to give prominence in my research to non-Western women directors and other unrepresented minorities in the film industry. In my scholarly writing, I often focus on feminist issues. In this talk, I advance the concepts of the Sartorial Islamic Baroque and folded feminisms in relation to contemporary Iranian women directors. As an intervention, I aim to shift the discourse of veiling and unveiling surrounding Iranian cinema to that of folding and unfolding, specifically drawing on Gilles Deleuze's philosophy of the Baroque and the fold, and also Laura Marx's model of enfolding, unfolding in connection to Islamic media and aesthetics. I argue that if veiling, unveiling is typically treated as a finite binary operation, then folding and unfolding as a process predicated on continuity is more attuned to the diverse forms of directing, acting, and living in and outside of Iran. The conservative patriarchal government in Iran enforces gender segregation, discriminates against women as citizens, subordinates their rights, and controls their sexuality. Nevertheless, the universalist methodology of Western feminism have been met with apprehension in the Middle East. Attending to more nuanced and inchoate modes of agency in Middle Eastern countries gives feminist studies a new complexity. Non-Western modes of feminism engage thinking by other means, sartorially, creatively, and experimentally. I contend that in response to the suppression of gendered experience, Iranian women filmmakers often resort to folded feminisms. They express their feminisms in a folded way by employing anonymous modalities, as we saw in Anonyma's ending of her film, disjunctive techniques, discordant visuals, conspicuous absence, and cryptic coding. I regard such folded feminisms as resistant micro-revolutions in the work of Iranian women directors. My today's talk not only builds on my past scholarship, and this is the rewind mode on the slide, but it also anticipates my future projects, and they're both short-term and long-term ones. And this is the fast-forward mode on the slide. I draw in my past scholarship, and in particular on my recently published book, Black Screens, White Frames, Gilles Deleuze and the Filmmaking Machine, which deals with questions of blankness, darkness, and non-images in cinema from a Deleuzean perspective. Reassessing cinematic absence as generative, this book introduces new film philosophical concepts, and you see some of them here: folds to black and white and elective mutism, and folded feminisms is also part of inspiration behind these concepts. So these concepts engage with absence in a productive fashion, especially in relation to minoritarian and non-Western global cinema. My past scholarship relevant to this talk also includes a series of articles, some of which have been mentioned by Sophia, which were published in a range of journals such as Screen, Frames, and In Media Res. Jump into the fast-forward mode. The key words in my talk's title directly correspond to my new projects. As such, my coinage of the Sartorial Islamic Baroque will provide foundation for my article in progress commissioned for the Encyclopedia Cinema Iranica, which we talked about. And this is the concept which I plan to formulate more broadly with respect to unique codes of Iranian cinema. And maybe we could talk more about it today so I can draw inspiration from your comments. My other coinage of folded feminisms will find renewed presence in my new book manuscript, Anonymous Cinema in the Global Age, which is the first comprehensive attempt to theorize anonymous modes of expression in global cinema from a historical, social, and political perspective. This book will examine anonymous forms of cinema that have recently arisen as a means of protest against repressive regimes across the globe. And we could mention different countries, we could mention Syria, Iran, that I'm interested in, Palestine, and Egypt. And this is a breakdown of the chapters in this new book that I'm working on. So as you can see from the slide, the book's first chapter highlights the phenomenon of contemporary anonymous women directors. And it will focus on the filmmaker who I'm very intrigued by, filmmaker Anonima or Anonymous, Iran, and also the anonymous collective Abu Nadara, Syria, the majority of whom are women. Chapter 2 of this book is also relevant to my discussion of folded strategies in cinema, as it demonstrates another anonymous modality represented by actually a lot of Iranian films that end without crew credits. And examples here include Remote Control, which you've seen already, Manuscripts Don't Burn, and Taxi. And so they're mentioned in chapter 2 here. I will now present a brief overview of scholarly literature that this project builds on and inspired by, and that will include questions of global film feminisms, sartorial studies, veil, hijab, and Iranian cinema, and theories of the fold in a range of disciplines. I will begin with global film feminisms. Recent books on gender and cinema forecast the futures of feminism and cinema, emphasizing a pluralistic and nomadic approach to feminist studies, and stressing the importance of global frameworks in feminist inquiries. The plural form of feminisms found in many of these texts listed here reflects a current tendency in feminist film studies to rely on multiple and polyvocal conceptualizations of feminism. And this is to counteract any singular and monolithic understanding of the term. Employing an inclusive frame of reference, these works often build upon the transnational and decolonial terms, as well as embodied approaches, such as film phenomenology, affect studies, and also Deleuze and Guattari studies. Haptic studies, we could mention the touch that Professor Tavakoli and I talked about before the start of the talk today. Plural feminisms respond to both the contemporary dynamic diversity of feminist frameworks, definitions, methodologies, and future visions, and the enhanced exploration of both global and local women's movements and modes of expression. The array of global and local perspectives on contemporary feminisms recognizes the uniqueness of countries around the world, the different trajectories of their political, economic, and cultural development, as well as the varying standpoints with respect to definitions of women's activism. As a salient example, the practice of veiling in Middle Eastern countries in general, and Iran in particular, has often been treated in oppositional, in generalized, and sometimes people claim ahistorical way. Charting the territory of diverse feminisms in Iran, scholars differentiate between Islamic state feminists, Islamic non-state feminists, Muslim feminists, and circular feminists. Feminisms in contemporary Iran are generally characterized by their fluidity, as women often smoothly transition from one mode to another. Such manifold approaches to Iranian feminisms, in the plural, acknowledge a multiplicity of ways in which to express women's interest and account for their voices. So my theorization of folded feminisms builds on this plural form of contemporary film feminisms, inspired by this multiplicity of discursive approaches to feminist studies and also modes of feminist expression. The system of sartorial modesty or hijab has had a considerable impact on organization of codes in Iranian cinema. Due to government censorship, Iranian directors often rely on veiled allegories, and the work of many notable post-revolutionary Iranian filmmakers in particular has been widely discussed in this context. Veiling as a social institution in Iran dictates the segregation of the sexes, as well as the division between the private and public spheres. As you all know, Iran has endured a long history of veiling and unveiling, with mandatory unveiling of women in 1935, followed by compulsory veiling after the Islamic Revolution of 1979. In the aftermath of the revolution, the images of unveiled women were either cut from previously released films altogether, or the inappropriate elements were, quote, and this is a quote from Hamid Nafisi, were blacked out with magic markers in successive frames. And I was very fascinated with these two posters that Hamid Nafisi shared with me. And you can see the traces of this practice that can be detected in these two film posters. And this is from his personal collection. And as you see, in both, instead of erasure, sartorial alterations are used as a tactic. And this is the two original posters over here that you can see the difference. Due to the imposition of veiling in the public sector, women in post-revolutionary Iranian cinema were rarely narrative agents and were to be dressed in hijab or chador, which obscured the contours of their bodies. No contact was permitted between male and female actors, presenting unsurmountable difficulties for the depiction of married couples on screen, let alone any further intimacies. As a result, filmmakers developed a unique aesthetic style whose characteristics are described in Nafisi's Islamic gaze theory and also Nigah Mutahideh's concept of displaced allegories. In contrast to the Western male gaze in cinema, theorized famously by Laura Mulvey, the Islamic gaze theory describes a system of framing which is predicated on the averted, veiled rather than direct, unveiled look. In response to the imposition of limits on image production under the morality codes, post-revolutionary directors began relying on displaced allegories, discernible at the level of form, rather than ideologically dictated content. Nafisi observes that forced veiling deprives women of choice and functions as an anti-modern mechanism. But he also points out that the veil can sometimes be a resistant medium of, for example, anonymity, granting its wearer the manipulation of the public sphere. In short, he draws our attention to the fact that in critical theory and artistic practice, the concept of the veil can sometimes be simplified, quote, ignoring the diverse forms with which women strategically accommodated, as well as resisted, subverted, or played with the official dictates on veiling. With this in mind, when the veil is adopted as a critical tool and aesthetic concept, the either-or rhetoric of veiling and unveiling might lead to the assumption of binary practices or approaches. An extensive reliance on the formal logic of veiling and unveiling may result in the reinstantiation of the opposition of male and female, East and West, observant and non-observant Muslim, thus reproducing the Iranian state doctrine of gender segregation. I propose that the shift from the rhetoric of veiling and unveiling to folding and unfolding can enable both readers and viewers to appreciate the inventive uses of the veil, which are often overlooked and discounted as strategies of resistance. So my first field is sartorial literature. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't know if I need to move this bar over here, maybe to the side, if you hopefully can see it. The connection between clothing and culture, fashion and film, the sartorial and the cinematic, has recently attracted the attention of many scholars. Here I'm listing just a few sources from the otherwise ample sartorial literature. In particular, there is great potential in exploring fabric and clothing from an Islamic perspective, especially with reference to the fold. Gilles Deleuze treats the fold in its synecdochical application to the broader notion of the Baroque, reinventing Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz as a Baroque philosopher of folds. In Deleuze's original conception, the Baroque manifests itself as an attribute or a way of thinking, rather than a limited period style. In his transhistorical approach, Deleuze suggests that the Baroque reintroduces itself during different periods and reemerges within various cultural contexts. As he stresses, a fold is always folded within a fold, like a cavern in a cavern. Unfolding is thus not the contrary of folding, but follows the fold up to the following fold. The fold is literally a complexity, an intricate folding together, rather than something that is easily divided. Deleuze approaches folding and folding materially, not metaphorically, conceptualizing this process through the immanence of matter, rather than signifying regimes of representation and recognition. Since the Baroque propagates by way of folds, Deleuze examines them transversally through different disciplines, such as mathematics, science, architecture, and art. Offering several models of the fold based on its material origin, including paper, derived from non-Western traditions, and fabric, which Deleuze claims seems to predominate in the Western world, he recognizes the textile model as one of the fold's primary instantiations and emphasizes the link between fashion and fold. He refers to, quote, folds of Islamic origin with respect to the work of the French psychiatrist Gaëtan de Clérambault, who took photographs of veiled women in Morocco. Deleuze is intrigued by Clérambault's obsession with the overabundant folds of Moroccan veils, observing that the system of folds, which dictate all the clothing of Moroccan women, including that of the face, describes the fullness of an Islamic Baroque. The philosopher distinguishes between the Islamic Baroque and what he calls, this is a quote from him, the Oriental line. So again, this is from his original text, whose influence he notices in the folding art of Simone Hantai. Deleuze discerns here in the work of Simone Hantai the presence of the full and the void in a Chinese fashion, end of quote. By contrast, he says, abundant folds replete with matter characterize the true Baroque. In addition to Deleuze, other notable scholars of the fold include Laura Marks, Tom Conley, Patricia McCormack, Giuliano Bruno, and Sage Walton. And I draw in a lot of this work listed here. And as a footnote here, I would like to also draw attention to a very recent issue of In Media Res, on From Screen to Pleat, Deleuzian Inflections in Visual and Media Discourses. And that featured a very interesting issue, featured contributions on the fold from Laura Marks, who I mentioned, Sage Walton, who I mentioned as well, but also Tim Murray, James Tweedy, and yours truly. Marx conceptualizes the unfolding aesthetics in the broader context of media philosophy. And so I'm listing some of the sources here as well, but I'll talk about Marx in particular. So she conceptualizes the unfolding aesthetics in the broader context of media philosophy, but global cinema, and in particular cinemas of the Middle East, often inspire her writings. She describes her model of experience, information, and image as three planes, among which there is a movement of ebb and flow, enfolding or virtualizing, and unfolding or actualizing. In Unfoldment and Infinity in particular, Marx links Islamic folds to such terms as batin, esoteric, and zahir, as exoteric. In Islamic philosophy, according to Marx, as the way she describes it in her book, batin presupposes an unfolded and implicate order of things, the inner forms or implicit meanings, while zahir entails the unfolded and apparent order of things, the outer forms. The relation between the fold and the spiritual world is also extensively explored in Juliana Bruno's work, so listed here. And she has a lot of articles on the fold as well. Thinking of cinema sartorially and materially as texture and surface, she argues that cinematic design is, quote, concerned with tailoring a space for affect and with exploring the material of emotional fabrics, end of quote. The modified approach to the veil that I pursue in the talk entails a changed perception of time and space in cinema, creating novel ways to convey affect and intensity, especially with the help of interesting cinematic techniques that I will talk about. This connection becomes especially relevant in experimental film and media, in which the fold is taken up as a line of flight, linking the sartorial Islamic Baroque to the political dimension of its relation to media. So now I will talk a little bit about two of these concepts, and then I will go to my examples. The sartorial Islamic Baroque transgresses the binary of the full and the void, aspiring to the spiritual rather than ritual manifestation of the fold. If the dogmatism of the veil dictates a rigid segregation between the private or the interior, the domain of women, and the public or the exterior, the domain of men, then the fold collapses this dichotomy, calling for a different approach to the veil. The wearer of the veil in the Middle East might face both internal and external impositions. The Islamic State laws enforcing veiling, or the Western colonial desire to unveil. From a Western standpoint, the veil is often approached as not merely traditional garb, like the fez or the kaftan, but rather as an oppressive cultural institution and a prison from which women must liberate themselves. I regard the sartorial Islamic Baroque as a means to show that the veil can be more than the state apparatus deems, since it has the potential through its folding and unfolding to become a vehicle for multiple sartorial transformations. If the veil is the major language of the state apparatus, and I use major and minor in Deleuzean sense here, with its veiling, unveiling prescriptions, then shifting the emphasis to the fold as a minorizing strategy dislocates and deterioralizes, again, to use Deleuzean locutions, the discourse of the veil, altering it from within. Privileging the fold in the discourse of the veil results in a more nuanced and creative approach, addressing the complexities of women's identities in Middle Eastern countries and aiding in the dislocation of some Western perceptions about the veil, based sometimes on public media cliches. The continuous separation of the fold resituates the familiar and particularly Western understanding of the veil, pushing the limits of what it can become through experimentation. The sartorial Islamic Baroque thus engages with a rereading of the concept of the veil through the innovative possibilities and openings of the fold, challenging representational models and moving beyond signification. It is concerned not with the dictums of revealing, concealing, representing, not representing, but with the oscillation of more inchoate non-representational states located in the folds and creases of matter. The defined innovation by Iranian women with respect to the veil exploits its ability to create folds and pleats, and it is this folding and unfolding that some Iranian women directors employ, sometimes blatantly, sometimes surreptitiously, through their adoption of various modes of authorship, including anonymity, accented practices, of which I will talk today, and various experimental cinematic techniques. Just as Deleuze's conception of the fold stands synecdochically with respect to the Baroque, so my theorization of folded feminisms bears the same relation to the sartorial Islamic Baroque. Deleuze regards images to be matter, appearing as light and movement, and I follow in his steps by treating cinema in the fashion of folding matter. Folded feminisms comprise many experimental cinematic strategies, relying on the interplay between overt and covert presentations. They can manifest in such techniques as camouflaging, absence, silence, and fragmentation. They deterialize the figurative in cinema by effacing the domain of visual inscription, proceeding not by negative erasure, but by folding and unfolding of matter. Iranian experimental women directors who exhibit different modes of authorship by detaching themselves from accepted notions of stable identities often rely on such folded feminisms in their films, fostering new forms of mobile political subjectivity and embodiment. Folded feminisms as experimental cinematic modes reveal more by showing less, as they unfold images and sounds while inviting spectators to create their own unfoldings. I now lay out my arguments for contemporary Iranian women directors and for their different directorial styles, as well as their folded feminisms as an expression of the sartorial Islamic Baroque, with a special focus on image absence in their practices. And when I say image absence, I don't mean that these empty frames, and this is my whole inspiration behind my work, when we see empty frames or black screens in films, those are not voided areas in the sense that there would be this opposition between the full and the empty or filled and unfilled space. Instead, I look at these empty frames as folded matter concealed in apparent voids. As Holy and Yelicher argue, quote, experimental modes in filmmaking in particular have been more conducive to telling non-dominant stories and sharing experiences marginalized by mainstream culture, end of quote. For my analysis of folded feminisms, I focus on these different accented practices, to use Hamid Nafis's term, and I look specifically today, for the purposes of this talk, on accented practices by Mariam Tafakori, Amania Akbari, and Anonima or Anonymous. And so those are interesting sort of accented modes that I consider today. Video arts or vignettes that Mania Akbari is known for, and Mariam Tafakori creates mostly video essays, and Anonima, to the best of my knowledge, I only know that there are 2 films by her, maybe more. I hope to discover more, but she mostly relies on phone footage and what we could call cell phone cinema, what Hamid Nafisi also terms as internet cinema. Today's multimodal culture embraces more diverse practitioners than the traditional filmmaker. Many artists, scholars, and critics now make video, sometimes termed as videographic essays, and essay films. Mariam Tafakori, a filmmaker who creatively engages with folding and unfolding, both in her life and artistic practice, divides her time between London and Shiraz. Her video essays engage with archival, ethnographic, and speculative documentary modes, investing in the plurality of subjectivities, especially in connection to women and their bodies at the site of politics, as well as what I'm intrigued by, the invisible, the untouchable, the unspoken as hidden, or we could say imaginal realms. Her video works, many of which are listed here, have been exhibited globally at various venues. In her proposition of Baroque cinema as an aesthetic category of film, one that generates its own cinema of senses, Sage Walton, who I mentioned today, transversely fuses Deleuze's ideas of the fold with Maurice Merleau-Ponty's concept of the flesh and the chiasm. She constructs a more phenomenological study with respect to the fold. Walton returns to the concept of the fold in her contribution to a special issue in Media Res that I mentioned, and her contribution is entitled "The Fold as Poetic Event." And so I just listed here some of the excerpts from her really interesting contribution. So in her contribution, she reflects on the fold in Claire Denis's Trouble Every Day, establishing a connection between a green scarf as an ordinary garment worn by an American woman and its transformation, as she says, in a poetically charged moment on the rooftop of Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral. And that translates, as she says, into an instance of the sartorial cinematics, right? I mean, she doesn't term it as the sartorial Baroque in particular, but that's how I read it. As June, Tricia Vesey, engages in amorous play with her new husband, she wraps the green scarf around her head and drapes it about her neck as protection against the gusty wind. So it's very practical and functional, right? Her use of the scarf. But as she poses for her husband's camera, June removes the scarf and places it on the parapet. The camera lingers intently on the garment in an extreme close-up, although not expanding into a full monochrome, as the wind, a quote from Sage Walton, visibly ripples through the scarf's delicate folds of green fabric. Then suddenly lifted by the breeze, the scarf is carried rising and falling over the rooftops of Paris. In this moment, the whirling garment as fold is transformed into what Deleuze, as Walton claims, calls the fold as event, in which the world itself is unfolded and unfolded, hidden and just so, film joins the actual sartorial fold with the virtual cinematic fold, as Walton observes, quote, finding a commensurately fabricated, windy fold in the film. The poetically charged sartorial Baroque in Claire Denis's Trouble Every Day helps us to appreciate both poetry and politics of the unique sartorial Islamic Baroque in Iranian director Hamza Fakhori's video essay Nazarbazi. And here I'm going to show a clip from this piece. So hopefully you can see my screen and hopefully you'll be able to hear the sound. If not, please.
Yeah, we are not seeing it yet. Could you share it?
Okay, I'll try. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay, that is strange.
We do see your screen, Dr. Conte. We just don't see the video opening.
All right, I'll have to stop sharing and then just do it again. I apologize for this disruption. I wanted to kind of go seamlessly between the screens, but
no problem.
All right, so I'm just going to do it from scratch. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Wonderful.
I can see your screen.
Right, and so please alert me if you cannot hear the sound or cannot see the image. All right, so I think I can expand it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Everything comes through fine.
Okay, so let me see if I can, again, seamlessly transition. If it doesn't work, please let me know. Can you see my slideshow again?
Yes, we are at your slideshow now.
Okay, it worked. Tafakori's piece has been described as, well, found footage collage that pieces together a history of intimacy in Iranian post-revolutionary cinema where depictions of physical contact are prohibited, end of quote. It spans Iranian films from 1982 to 2020, including clips from Rakhshan Bani Adamad, Dariush Mehru, Bahrai Beyzai, and Marsieh Meshkini, which are also interspersed with poetic texts by Farouk Farrokhzad, Roland Barthes, Jacques Derrida, and Tafakori herself. Based on the citation of an unknown Iranian poet featured in the film, the word Nazarbazi, according to the film, can be translated as the play of glances, and that's the inspiration behind the title. Discovering the hidden moments of forbidden touch in many Iranian post-revolutionary films, Tafakori's video also forcefully demonstrates the imperceptible potential for the poetically, just drawing on Walton, but in this case also politically charged power of the fold. This potential is emphasized in the sequence, which was a very intriguing sequence to me, which features the depictions of spiral staircases coupled with dizzying circular camera pans. Remixing film clips from post-revolutionary Iranian films, the video illuminates the transversal nodes in the discourse of the veil that might otherwise have been unforeseen. As such, the undulating flowing fabric of the veil becomes the very basis for Tafakori's creative entanglements as folded feminisms. We observe differently colored fabric that women wear in selected films, overlaid with variously colored monochromes, such as white, black, red, or even yellow, as we see actually also at the end of the film that she uses different color monochromes. As Elhum Shekerifar argues, referring to Tafakori's sartorial cinematics, while structure bubbles under the surface, Tafakori sutures, her craft hinging on fragile lines between the intimacy of the domestic, the precision of the medical, the interpretive permission of the artistic. What isn't visible isn't necessarily absent. It is to be gleaned. In Bruno's sense, then, Tafakori's video, I would just use Bruno's quotation here, tailors as the space for affect, and also hidden or illicit desire, and manifested through color, blush in red or yellow, changing hues and speeds, cross-cutting between different locales, freezing or reversing time as the past surges up to the present. Transcending binaries of veiling and unveiling and engaging with the force of the sartorial Islamic Baroque, Tafakori locates capacious, resistant modes of folding and unfolding in the interstices of post-revolutionary Iranian films. And I will focus on two examples that I used before, but they're very relevant to this talk. And I would like to highlight that those are accented modes, right, that I'm interested in contemporary women filmmakers' work. So I will talk about Mania Akbari and Anna Nima, and I will focus on 6 video arts because it's a less known work by Mania Akbari, which was from her sort of the beginning of her career. And then I will briefly mention these 2 interesting, intriguing documentaries by Anna Nima. Keeping global and local feminisms in mind, while Akbari's authorship manifests itself in a more self-assured and open manner, Anna Nima's stance is that of a more reserved, anonymous woman director. Both positions, especially in an Iranian context, are resistant and defiant. Openly addressing Iranian gender politics through her audacious authorship, Akbari investigates multiple conditions and states connected to womanhood. And there are multiple ones in her work. Virginity, she considers sexuality, disability, divorce, adultery. She explores affects, forces, and intensities that traverse her body, triggered by her experiences of immigrating from Iran to the UK, battling disease, undergoing pregnancy, and becoming older. Early in her career, Akbari made a notable appearance in Kiarostami's 10, a film that explored women's position in Iranian society. And shortly afterwards, she made her first feature film, 20 Fingers, that I analyze elsewhere. But unfortunately, a few years later, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And after that, she made a sequel to Kiarostami's 10, a docufiction called 10+4. In 2011, as Akbari was working on the feature film Women Do Not Have Breasts, which was later changed from Tehran to London, that you see here, members of her crew were arrested and she fled to London, where she has been working and living ever since. Many of Akbari's video arts and films reflect the radical treatment of her themes. If Iran was envisioned by the Islamic State as a purified collective national body, as Nigah Motahedeh argues, Akbari puts her individual female body on display both in daily life and in her art. And this is to resist political impositions. In her interview with the feminist journal Another Gaze, which she conducts in the nude, Akbari reveals the folded flesh of her post-mastectomy breasts and a tattooed cesarean scar, inviting us to unfold her experience of womanhood. When Akbari lived in Iran, she appeared both in public and in her artwork wearing veils of many different colors and styles. She actually also experiments with her hairstyles, which I find quite intriguing. Experimenting with the resistant folding and unfolding in life provided her with the means of artistic expression and experimentation in cinema. And one example is her photo series listed here. And in these works, which are multiple works actually, she appears in variously styled, colored, and folded veils, posing as an innocent nun, a defiant bride, or a liberated woman in makeup. The multiplicity of manias highlights the processual and nomadic side of becoming woman, again to use Deleuze, overcoming the fixed and stable identities imposed on women by the state. Governed by the resistant use of the sartorial Baroque in daily life, Akbari employs folded feminisms in her experimental film practice, building on fragmented aesthetics, split screens, disjointed montage, and vacant shots. And I will just briefly refer to 20 Fingers, but mostly I will analyze 6 video arts. So comparable to the 7 vignettes in 20 Fingers, so it's a vignette-based film, more of a narrative-based film, 6 video arts, which is more experimental, presents itself as 6 segments, which last about 6 minutes each. Various situations in which Akbari puts herself in these videos tackle issues of female subordination and restrictions imposed on women. In this fragmented collage, Akbari daringly exploits the capacity for multiple frames in the digital composition of the screen, relying extensively on spatiotemporal dislocations and audiovisual disjuncture. As mentioned previously, my concept of folded feminisms extends my theory of folds to black or white. Building on Marx's theory of enfolding and unfolding, I describe the use of black or white screens in cinema as folds to black or white, as opposed to fades, which imply alternative readings of history and memory. I demonstrate how folds to black or white entail an enfolded, suppressed, or dismissed experience of minority groups, including women, and an enfolded, censored, or erased information by dominant powers. I contend that if mainstream media leave the screens blank, censoring information and suppressing minoritarian experience, filmmakers in turn resort to blank screens in a gesture of what I call elective mutism. Their refusal to represent acquires the positive valence of a defiant protest, hence elective. Cinematically, filmmakers rely on folds to black to signal that a certain experience has been dismissed, deemed non-existent, or unimportant. Turning to Akbari's employment of image absence as an instantiation of folded feminisms, with an emphasis on folds to black in this particular case, I will now focus on scene and 6 video arts. And so this is just a kind of like put you within the context of 20 Fingers. There are a lot of resemblances between 20 Fingers and Six Video Arts. And those are all the videos that Six Video Arts is comprised of. And I will focus on Sin over here. So I'll have to share my clip. Again, hopefully I can do it seamlessly. And could you please let me know if you can see my screen now?
We can see your screen.
Wonderful. Just in the interest of time, I will jump to the middle and then to the end. So then when the image at the bottom changes. Oops. Okay, back to my slideshow, hopefully seamlessly again.
Yeah, we can see it.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So Sin, Akbari's third short in Six Video Arts, features a top and bottom split frame showing the upper and lower parts of a woman's body. In the top image, Akbari's character is Sin costumed in a white pointed cap and veil. Her face is painted white and marked with the images of hearts and tears, reminiscent of the Commedia dell'arte character Pierrot. She silently but defiantly sways to and fro on a swing. By comparison, in the opening shot of her narrative film 20 Fingers, which I'll show here, Akbari is likewise seen rocking on a seesaw, with her face framed by a white veil, moving up and down. In both shots, Akbari looks spectator directly in the eye, in sharp contrast to the averted or unfocused look prevalent in post-revolutionary Iranian films. Within the strict code of modesty, a direct look would be associated with forbidden touch, and Akbari provocatively brings the two senses into communication. At the beginning of Sin, the lower frame, the nether regions of the woman's body, is blank static. These are the body parts deemed sexually charged. When an image finally materializes in the frame, we see Akbari's fancy shoes, her painted toenails, and the folds of her dress. Gradually, drops of dark liquid, presumably blood, appear on the white dress, which can suggest various states of the female body. So most likely it might be the start of the menses, but it could also be the loss of virginity or even a miscarriage. The sounds of laughter followed by ululation and drumming are distinctly heard. The swing comes to a stop, and now the upper frame switches to a blank screen, erasing the face of a sinful painted woman who needs to cover herself. The visible split between the mind and the body in the upper and lower frames suggests desexualization of the body and the strict regulation of its public display that forbids the flaunting of sexuality. Akbari's folded feminisms gesture toward the restriction of sexual freedom for Iranian women. Calling attention to the suppressed experience, however, the seemingly voided screen serves instead as a fold between the corporeal and the incorporeal, embodied matter and spiritual soul, which are not separated, but interconnected. So finally, I'm going to go to my example with which I began by Anonyma and focus on the accented mode of phone footage compilations. What is known about Anonyma is based on conjecture, either from the two documentaries that she made anonymously, to the best of my knowledge, those are the only ones that I know about, or from her very few public statements to the press. Like Akbari, Anonyma is an exilic Iranian woman director. After immigrating to Paris, France, she has made return trips to Iran to visit her family and friends. Her principal experimental strategy is that of appropriating and recontextualizing images, which helps her to recreate her own sense of history. Both of her films are composed of remediated footage, a mashup of authorless YouTube videos that depict fragmentary episodes of the Iranian Green Movement protests in 2009, segments of filming television, during which the unseen viewers operate the remote control. That's why the film is called remote control, telecommand in French. Switching them on satellite or local, live or blocked channels, and a hybrid assortment of various documentation. Anonymous filmmaking is thus an accented networked, or again, to use Hamid Nafisi's locution, internet cinema, which has sprouted recently in the global world as a means of protest against repressive institutions. Mm-hmm. Working in this mode, she collects footage by anonymous internet users, identifying with their agenda, but also remaining anonymous in solidarity with them. But then she arranges this footage according to her personal vision, which results in a recognizable aesthetics. Her work demonstrates her desire for exposing the brutality and corruption of power structures, calling out for social transformation and regime change. In the Western world, women had fewer reasons for anonymity upon winning certain civil freedoms. But in the Middle East, the situation is different, and the anonymous position of Anonyma is as politically aware as it is gendered. Anonyma's folded feminisms include suspended shots, cryptic messages, empty screens, invisible characters, and off-screen space. And here I just want to briefly show the screen from Fragments of Revolution, her first film that I mentioned, because her work is so rare and not readily available. So I just want to show that, sort of to give you the feel for what her work feels like and what's it about. So hopefully you can see my screen again.
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Professor Conte, like instead of the YouTube, yeah, okay, wonderful, yeah.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, is everything okay? Wonderful, yeah. Please go ahead.
All right, so back to my slideshow. So her first film, Fragments of a Revolution, the clip from which you've just seen, takes us back to the protests of 2009. Although professional foreign journalists were sent out of the country during the protests, many citizens in the streets anonymously filmed and uploaded their videos to the internet. As its title suggests, Fragments of a Revolution is marked by fragmented imagery joined by irrational cuts, visual and sonic absences, and discordances between text and commentary. These strategies appear in sharp contrast to the state-sponsored documentaries and news reportage that address the same historical events. And the events that are mentioned in the film are the Iran-Iraq War and the 2009 presidential election. Communicating with her friends in Iran, Anonima uses cryptic X's instead of their real names and substitutes their voices with those of other people, while also employing body doubles for herself. Anonima is enveloping her anonymous persona within a fold, ambiguously allowing and disallowing some parts of the body, maybe her own, maybe someone else's, to appear in the frame, while shrouding other parts. The creative use of the sartorial Islamic Baroque by way of filmic folds is an undercover tactic, and Anonima's anonymity helps her and others to preserve the freedom of mobility and negotiate borders in the global world. Anonima's mode of authorship is a deliberate choice. As she states with respect to Remote Control, her second film, and those are some images from both films, anonymity is a way of reminding us of this truth. It is not always up to politicians to make or write history. Today, we are anonymous. This is our strength and our weakness. And we screened this film in Buffalo at the Virtual Penny Art Center, which I curate this global film series. And actually, Hamid Nafisi was our keynote speaker that year. Although Anonima does not openly reveal her body like Akbari, but instead relies on partially obscured body doubles, the spectator clearly sees articles of female clothing, including part of a veil, a woman's hands typing on a laptop, and other details. A few subtle details also disclose Anonima's solidarity with the political cause of the Iranian Green Movement, such as the green color of her outfit, partially visible in the frame, or the green ring on her finger. The defiant gesture of smoking in Remote Control, there was a lot of smoking in the second film. I only have like one clip to show, but at the end. But you can see that she's holding the cigarette in her hands over here. It speaks volumes about Anonima's stance as a woman director. In post-revolutionary films, smoking, according to Hamid Nafisi, quote, was considered sexually stimulating to men. Hence, women were rarely shown smoking on a screen, unless to denote that they were loose. And Anonima openly confronts this prohibition, and we can also see it in Mania Akbari's work, interestingly enough. Her portrayals of women, if not daring as in Akbari's work, are nevertheless prominent. In Fragments of a Revolution, she emphasizes the active participation of women in the Iranian Green Movement by featuring footage of women picking up rocks and handing them to male demonstrators. In Remote Control, women's voices overheard discussing Iranian politics in the background are as emphatic as the men's. In addition to her chosen directorial position of anonymity, Anonima's films feature folds to black as part of her experimental repertoire. And so this is an image from the film. So I'll now focus on this film, and I will be wrapping up. Anonima's film Remote Control is punctuated with visual absences and folding strategies. Sometimes they're diegetic, sometimes not diegetic. In the final sequence of this film, a woman's hands are shown in the uploaded YouTube video called TV Iran Film Anonym. The anonymous woman writes a series of statements in Persian on sheets of white paper, beginning with, "I am sick of television." Again, the film is about presidential elections, right, of the aftermath of it. And it shows us how people watch TV, but we actually don't see these people, right? We only hear their voices. The filmmaker or her body double watches the video together with us, holding a burning cigarette, as mentioned, between her right index and middle fingers. This mise en abîme, in which a pair of hands move over a laptop screen image of a pair of hands writing, is both an image of censorship and a sign of its defiance. I am sick of fearing the Islamic Republic. The final declaration, and I'm sick of censoring myself, even though I'm thousands of kilometers away, laments the denial of the filmmaker's free and natural voice. I envisioned my talk today as a fold of sorts. Therefore, it begins and ends with reference to the same sequence in anonymous film as if folding on itself. So let me now share my final clip from the end of Anonymous Remote Control. Hopefully you can see the screen now. And I should mention that this, thank you. I should mention that this clip actually comes from my own remix footage, video essay that was a contribution to this issue on the fold that I mentioned in Media Res. And this is called Folded Credits. And I will just, it's really brief. I'll just screen it. Okay, back to my slideshow. At the end of the film, we hear the startling sound of a gunshot. Either the laptop screen is shattered by a bullet, or it displays the image of a fractured screen. And the final frame falls to black. The spectator is placed in the position of the director herself in a calculated effect. The smashed laptop screen, on which we're watching a film, could just as well be in front of us. Either the filmmaker and her nameless collaborators are in mortal jeopardy, or she has herself taken vengeance on the image of her oppression by the government. In other words, both conditions, jeopardy and vengeance, are enfolded in this final black screen. In both of her films, Anonima is careful to avoid reflections in the black mirror of digital screens, of her own or her body doubles, either her body or her face, in the laptop screen, or the bodies of her friends sitting in front of the flat screen televisions. In the last scene of Remote Control, this mirror screen duplicity is shattered. When the shattered screen at the climax of Anonyma's film falls to black, it also serves as a warning to all participants, and to those who might attempt to distribute the film surreptitiously, that severe penalties await those who might be indexed in a credit roll. In lieu of credits, we see the final inscription, an anonymous film, accompanied by a series of statements with which I opened my talk today. The fold to black that swallows information normally contained in the credits is an instance of self-censorship that the director laments in the final sequence. But by extension, it points emphatically to the suppression of voices by the government of Iran. To sum up, the Baroque fold is an infinite waveform, continuous, neither limbed nor bordered. The Sartorial Islamic Baroque escapes the dyads of veiling, unveiling, which might reinforce the hegemonic subaltern system of colonialism, the political and religious conflicts between Western and Islamic cultures, and the hierarchies of gender and authority. When the wearer handles the veil by creatively wrapping and unwrapping it, folds are created, allowing for more lenience in experimentation and creativity. The concept of the Sartorial Islamic Baroque mobilizes diverse modes of women's authorship and accounts for a variety of cinematic experimental strategies and techniques. Folded feminisms in the work by contemporary Iranian women directors follow a Baroque line that both folds and unfolds experience and information, the concavities and convexities of private and public space, the communication of bodily affect, and the assertion of political community. and their anonymous authorship, accented practices, and experimental modes, Tafakori, Akbari, and Anonyma, find not the absence of voice or the void of censorship, but the fullness of empowered protest in which they reclaim their expression as women, filmmakers, and citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Professor Conte. Like, you know, the way you interweave sartorial elements, like with cinematic narratives, offer a fresh perspective on cultural and artistic expression. Fascinating. So I do have questions. But I would like to first open to floor for esteemed attendees. Please feel free to raise your digital hand or leave your question in the chat box.
Gar.
Negarjan, please go ahead.
Very much, Professor Tanya. What a fascinating talk. I was really intrigued by the sort of the choice of movies. Very beautiful. Thank you. So I have two questions, but I think my favorite one is this. So I'm going to ask you, considering the veil as a site of creative resistance, as you mentioned in your talk, and sort of an aesthetic manipulation, how do you see these cinematic strategies shaping or reconfiguring the audience's emotional or affective experience of, let's say, intimacy, veiling, and unveiling? I mean, are there any specific ways that these representations sort of lead to a collective or individual sense of belonging or alienation within the public or private spheres?
Yeah, that is such a rich question.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead. Do you want to expand?
Maybe just a little shorten it. It was a little bit long. Yeah. So I was really because these movies are not as, like, we cannot call it, these are like popular movies. So not many people watch them. So I was just wondering about I don't know if there are any evidences that you have maybe in your research came across that talks to the audience's perception of these movies. I mean, not to just decrease from the quality and the value of these movies, though.
Right. This is a very, very good question, especially that you expanded on this idea, right, that these movies are not as popular and maybe not in circulation, some of them, because as I mentioned, Anonyma's piece, especially Remote Control, I actually discovered it by chance. I curate the global film series in Buffalo, as I mentioned, so we focus on a particular country each year. And so our first inaugural series was on Iran, and Hamid Nafisi provided a keynote. And so I completely by accident came across Remote Control. This is the first film that I discovered by this intriguing filmmaker, Anonyma. And I remember sitting in the audience with Hamid Nafisi actually next to me, and we were completely mesmerized by this clouds of smoke on the screen because she smokes a lot in this film. And so we just kind of exchanged some ideas about the film, and we were completely kind of speaking about the emotional responses of the audience, right? We just felt that we needed to do something about it. And then Hamid Nafisi, actually provided these posters for me. We had like this lovely dinner after this screening. So it was a public screening of her film, Remote Control. And I would say that there were a lot of questions from the audience. A lot of people actually, some of them were familiar with Iranian films, especially with the sort of more popular filmmakers, right, that would be in wider circulation. But many of them, were like reacting in this very sort of emotional way, intrigued by her stance of anonymity, of course, but also by the way she, hides her characters. There are so many invisible characters in this film. She never shows their faces. And that immediately reminded me of Abbas Kiarostami's invisible characters, right? Because there's so many in this film. Also one of my favorite filmmakers. And so we talked how this film was completely different, right, from how we know and approach Iranian cinema. And so part of my goal actually is to focus on, this rare filmmakers, because the existing film criticism, it touches upon the work of more famous art house filmmakers, right? So I mentioned Rakhshan Bani-Adamad, right, Kiarostami, and many of the clips from Tafakuri's video actually, list this famous filmmakers. So this is part of my goal. This is exactly what I'm trying to do. And also, I am interested in videographic criticism because Tafakuri's video, it actually focuses on all these famous filmmakers, right, that are more known to the general public. So it kind of helps us to find some hidden parts, right, in those more well-known films to us. And I think we can do a lot with this accented forms, kind of getting to the idea of folding and unfolding, of affect, and read bodily politics differently through this accented videos. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, very much. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, that was very enlightening. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think we have one question from Mariam in chat box that she said that thank you so much for thought-provoking talk, Professor Conte. Your work introduced the concept of the full feminism in Iranian cinema. So how might this concept apply to films like The House is Black by Forough Farrokhzad, which explore terms of the marginalization and identity through poetic and layer narrative?
Okay. Sophia, I was trying to read the question in the chat, but I didn't see it. I guess maybe it was.
So she sent it through the direct message. I'm not sure that.
Then repeat it because I was trying to read it in the chat.
Yeah, definitely. So, she basically asked that how might this concept, the folded feminism, apply to films like The House is Black by Forough Farrokhzad, which explore theme of the marginalization and identities through poetic and layered narratives.
So the reference is to House is Black, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's also a very good question. So basically, because I'm in the process of writing my entry, right, for Cinema Iranica, because I think we can do a lot of interesting things with this concept of the Sartorial Islamic Baroque in particular, and folded feminisms as well as a kind of an inspiration behind that. I'm interested in looking further into like a wider spectrum of films. And so House is Black is also a very interesting suggestion. So we can look into some of those early examples. But specifically for the time being, I want to focus on how contemporary filmmakers discover some hidden moments, right? Interstices, how things are hidden in these interstices, right, of earlier films. So my goal is, for the time being, to focus on more contemporary approaches to the Sartorial Islamic Baroque, so that we could forcefully bring it into the present as well, right, and make it, more politically aware, right, of the common political context as well. But this is an interesting suggestion, and I think potentially we can do things with this concept with respect to earlier films like The House is Black.
In the future. So, yeah, definitely. So I'm just checking to make sure that if there is any others questions. Okay, I say SA, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, this is very fascinating. Thank you so much. I'm wondering personally how you came about wanting to do this, if you feel comfortable sharing, and being an immigrant in the United States and seeing what people are dealing with here and the suppression of women's rights and how it somehow parallels. For those of us that are immigrants, it's kind of horrifying, to come from Iran to the United States and to see how every year American women and the women in the United States are losing their rights. I'm just wondering, do you have a personal anecdote or any kind of personal motivation that you feel comfortable sharing? Thank you.
Yeah, that is such a profound question. Thank you. And I just really love your name, Elahé. That reminds me of, my filmmaker with whom I began and was inspired by today. So again, I'm interested in affect theory in general. So I'll just begin maybe from a more theoretical and then kind of go to my personal motivation behind this. Just because my book that has been recently published, Black Screens, White Frames, it draws on Deleuze and specifically on affect theory. And in this book, I talk about moments of absence, also silence, in a productive and generative fashion. So not as a negative erasure, right? But how we can do things with anonymous modes, right? And how we can express our protest through what I call elective mutism. And so this is sort of the theoretical underpinning behind this project, which is a continuation of my sort of more like a wider intellectual project that I pursue. So affect theory, because I always thought that you could do more things with moments of folding and unfolding in terms of how it produces this affective states, right? And how we respond to them as spectators, as has been mentioned today. But with regard to my personal background, so I was not born in Iran, right? So I'm not Iranian. But I always felt, because I'm an immigrant, I immigrated from Russia originally. I always felt that because there are a lot of interesting cultural affinities between Iranian culture and Russian culture. I've been in the States for 20 plus years now. So I kind of, more conversant in both cultural contexts. And I always related to, Iranian culture personally growing up. I read a lot and watched a lot of films, but specifically my interest in a scholarly way was molded by the presence in my life of a professor who was also my advisor in my dissertation, Professor Joan Kopchak, who is now at Brown University. Because she's also writing on Iranian cinema, as many of you might know. So she was an advisor on my dissertation, but also I took her class on Iranian cinema. And this is when I discovered Iranian cinema for myself. And this is when my interest started to take form and shape. And then she also introduced me to Hamid Nafisi, who has become a good friend. And first, he came to the University at Buffalo with a lecture, and then I invited him for my global film series, and we exchanged many interesting emails on Iranian cinema and things that we can approach it with different tools. And I respect Hamid Nafisi's scholarship. Actually informed my own approach to Iranian cinema a lot. But basically, that's what is behind, right, my interest in pursuing this different tools, how to approach culture and cinema in general in Iran.
Fascinating journey. So we have an interesting question from Leila Muslim in chat box. Thank you so much for your illuminating talk. Would you like to know how the experience of the veiling or unveiling through these movies is being perceived through the lens of masculinity?
Oh, that is a very interesting take. I haven't thought about it yet, but that provides a lot of food for thought, I have to say. Again, I just think that this concept is so capacious and ample, and I think we can do different things with it. I will confess, I have not thought about it in this way, but I encountered some interesting articles, that I think might help me to maybe pursue these ideas further. So I, thank the whoever asked that question. I thank you for showing me that other interesting aspect, right? And definitely there is a lot more to think about here.
Yeah, definitely. So Professor Conte, that's like my question. You clearly mentioned that your focus was like basically on anonymous or rare filmmaker, but I'm curious to know that how do you see this like visual or like narrative style of the Persepolis, Marjan Satrapi, aligning with your concept of the folding, where layers of the personal or like politic elements intertwine? Could this animated approach serve as another way to resist conventional cinematic noise or like amplifying like feminist voices in any way?
Yeah, I have to confess, Sophia, your voice is like
Okay.
cutting in and out. So if you could just maybe repeat some parts of your
Yeah,
question.
definitely. So like my question is that, well, like you clearly mentioned that your focus is on like on anonymous or like in a way rare filmmakers. I'm curious to see that the visual and narrative style of the Persepolis, like by Marjan Satrapi, aligning with your concept of the folding in any ways, like, could this animated approach serve as another way to resist conventional cinematic or like, like in one way amplify feminism voices?
I think I understood what you're asking. So this is what Mariam Tafakori does, I think.
Yeah.
She makes us look at these films in a completely different, new way. And that's why I'm really intrigued by her, the body of the video work that she creates. So in addition to Nazar Bazi, right, she also made a lot of other video essays that are also compilations of earlier, more popular, right, more conventional based films, right, with narrative structure. And I think what she does, and that's what videographic criticism does in general, I'm very intrigued by its potential, because with the help of videographic tools, we can do a lot of interesting things, right? We can discover things that we as spectators didn't pay attention to, right, in those more conventional forms. And my book actually, right, like on Black Screens, White Frames, it doesn't focus on experimental cinema, right? It focuses on the instances of like folding to black or white in conventional narrative films. And so, expanding this idea that we can actually rediscover, right, those more well-known films through this accented modes, right, and the affordances of videographic tools today that are available to us, right, as digital producers. So we can take, there's more agency for us as spectators to participate in the intervening into the text, right, of the director. So before the digital turn, right, it was always a monolithic sort of static model, right, of a text, like the filmmaker as an auteur or an artist, that we don't dare to interfere, right, in the production, right, of those films. And now with videographic criticisms, we can do more, we can interfere, but we can also help others see things that might have been unnoticed, that we have overlooked or discounted, right, in those films. Like this sort of moments of monochromes in Tafakori's piece, right? There is affect hidden there. And the veil, right, is that undulating flowing fabric, also like in Claire Denise's films, as is visibly shown, right? So she helps us to see things differently in those more conventional narratives. That's why I'm inspired by this accented modes and what they can do for us, how they can make us think differently and see things differently.
Thank you so much, Professor Conte. And I think the last question is for Professor Tawakkoli. Please, Ustad, go ahead.
Professor Shilina, thank you for your inspiring and very rich theoretical presentation that has really inspired me to think of a whole lot of other issues. One issue that I thought it would, going along with this folding and unfolding and the way you have sort of turned women's body covering, hijab, into a much more sophisticated kind of analysis of self-presentation, self-refashioning, and all that. I was wondering whether you could not do the same by Maryam Tafakkuri's concept of nazarbazi. Nazar means gaze. Nazarbazi is gaze as a playful dialogic processes. So, which sort of overcomes the division between the screen, the film, and the viewer, and bringing that dialogic sort of nazarbazi, I think it could have the same theoretical impact on interactions between the audience and the film. The whole concept of gazing, it becomes multiplied and would go much beyond Mulvey's really significant intervention.
Yeah, and this is a very, very profound question as well. That's why I was intrigued by her video, right? That she makes us as audience, right, see things differently. And this is also why I was intrigued initially by Iranian films, because it presents itself as a different system with unique cinematic codes, right? And many of the famous Iranian and non-Iranian scholars writing on Iranian cinema have been arguing about this system of really unique way of like the gaze functions, right? The averted look, right? As opposed to the direct look. And I think we can definitely explore the idea of how, like, kind of extend the idea of the gaze to the audience. I think that definitely is a note that I'm going to put down because I'm intrigued by its potential. Because what Tafakkuri does, right, is also how to make the audience see things differently by means of, you know, this play on averted and direct look. Because she explores, as I mentioned, a lot of hidden realms, right? She was trying to kind of explore the sense of touch because the touch is forbidden, right? And how the gazes, averted gazes, right, would substitute the sense of touch in the film. And I think that's her main goal. That's why the film is titled this way. But also what I saw in her video, because I see everything through folding and unfolding, because I'm, you know, living through this concept right now. Right. So I saw this interesting potential for this folded feminisms that she employs, because this monochrome screens, right? She's using and extending, right? The films basically that she's compiling as in a video collage, right? She's using poetic means. So as you saw, you know, there are some interesting poetic instances of flickering or hidden, right? And she draws on poetic texts and, you know, some of her own texts, but also she puts this monochrome screens in, right? And there are some filmmakers who actually rely on differently colored screens, you know, like blue comes to mind, right, as a state of affect, to show how color can function also as this state of emotional fabric, and tailors the space of affect, right? So that's her own contribution, because that's how she sees fabric, right? She sees it as a fold, as matter, right? As Deleuze would say. So she's folding and unfolding matter in this film, and that's what I'm intrigued by. But the gaze is also very interesting.
And bringing wedding Ananima and Tafakkuri, then you would have folding and unfolding of nazarbazi. And that makes it really amazing. And it can also, in analysis of complexity of looking and covered, and it will really bring out the playfulness of some of the scenes in Iranian films that replicates the streets, you know, and how men and women dialogue with one another through this folding and unfolding and gazing and counter gazing, in a sense.
Yeah, that's brilliant. absolutely. Right. So I want to do more things with specifically this film and Tafakori's whole oeuvre, right, of her video essays, because I think she discovers a lot in post-revolutionary films with the help of these videographic tools that we haven't really noticed before.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Conte. And Professor Tavallaei, please go ahead and unmute yourself. I think you're still mute.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Professor Tavallaei, we cannot hear you.
Sorry.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, we can't hear.
Yeah.
Concerning the, Tafakkuri's movie, I wanted to ask whether, it seems to me that the body is always the site of resistance for her, whether veiled or unveiled. Because throughout, our own culture, there has been time that, for example, because of the forced veiling, forced unveiling, it was veiling which was a site of resistance, and vice versa. And it seems to me that always this concept should be taken into consideration. The body should always be regarded as the site of resistance. And it seems to me that it had. And thank you very much. Thank you very much. It seems to me I would like to know your words concerning this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So the veil and the body, they're definitely interconnected, right? So for Tafakkuri and for Akbari and for Ananima, the body is a site of resistance, right? As I was trying to argue with respect to all three examples. So my idea, right, and inspiration behind folded feminisms is that there is a variety of different ways, right, to look at the body as the site of politics and resistance. And there's a multiplicity of, like, look, there's an anonymous woman filmmaker, right? And there's a very audacious and open, sort of authorship, right, that we see in Akbari. It's very assertive. So, she poses in the nude, right? For example, as I mentioned, right, for another gaze. And Ananima kind of, hides behind various objects and, there are invisible characters in her films. So there are different modes of expression, right, with respect to the female body. And my inspiration behind this concept of folded feminism is that we should consider all of these different modes and modalities. And maybe that's also my cultural context, right? That, sometimes, especially in more oppressive regimes, right? Like when you immigrate to a different country because of certain aspects, you just feel that there are forms of resistance that are not noticed by, more democratic societies. And those, should not be discounted, and they have the right to exist, right? To be noticed and to be shaped in a sort of new alternative way, maybe, right? But they are also forms of resistance, and we should recognize that.
And concerning the word Nazarbazi, while it has, after all, somehow a connection with the concept of voyeurism, the concept of gazing, as you mentioned. But at the same time, this concept seems to be very deeply rooted in Persian culture, particularly in the poetry of Hafiz. در نظربازی ما بیخبران حیرانند، عشق داند که در این دایره سرگردانند. Concerning our Nazarbazi, those who are unknown cannot know anything about it, those who have not been informed. And it's love, what he says, that knows that these informed people are wandering or drowning in this idea somehow. Sorry for such a nonsensical translation of mine. And but it is very, I think, important. I wanted to know if Akbari had I mean, somehow in mind that concept or not?
Yeah, Tafakuri, you mean? Yeah, Tafakuri's credits, which I kind of presented right as part of my slideshow with her films, just to show you how many. There are actually 90 films that she uses in this video collage, 90. And I've seen maybe about 20 of them. So I intend to watch all of them because I am intrigued by how she, again, makes us look at them through a completely different lens. But she also lists at the end poetic texts that she draws on. And what she says with respect to Nazar Bazi, and I don't speak Farsi, so I will have to rely on experts like you. So thank you very much for kind of expanding on this concept. And I will definitely look further into this. But what she lists in the credit sequence is an unknown poet. So she's kind of drawing on this unknown poet and an inspiration, how the word is translated for her. And that's an inspiration behind her piece. But again, because she builds more on this theories, of displaced allegories, the theories that I talked about, I think that's her inspiration with the title. But I think there's even more to unearth in this piece, beyond the gaze.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for kind of expanding on the concept for me.
All right.
Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone, who
great day.
joined us today, and thank you for
Happy holidays.
interesting questions.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays, everyone, and Happy New Year.